Rarely has mankind hesitated.
It is time.
Tasker.
Solo variety
Down to earth.
show.
Tasker.
Solo variety
Down to earth.
show.
Tasker.
Solo variety
Down to earth.
show.
It's time for the Professor Tasker Show.
Greetings, hello, and welcome to this exciting special episode of Close Encounters of the Podcast Kind. I am your host, Tasker, and I will be doing this episode by myself. So, first off, no, Nick is not dead. I haven't snapped and killed him on accident or anything close to that. Nick simply is not feeling well this week because of certain side effects of a certain injection for a certain pandemic going on that, honestly, I think he may have gotten against his will. For all I know, I don't know. Either way, he should be fine and back next week. Obviously, we needed an episode to come out, and, I just can't do it without Nick, so I decided to do something on my own. So really quick before we get into the episode, this is kind of going to be like the solo format whenever shit goes down. I mean, life happens. Nick and I are only human, but we are going to do our best to make sure that you get an episode every single week. So here I am doing an episode by myself. Anyways, let's done with introductions. Let's just jump right into it and let's chat about something fascinating and creepy, in my opinion. So you may have heard me talk about Amori, the video game, on the show before. Without any spoilers, there is a jump scare in the game that involves a character that appears with a twisted neck, a gaping open mouth, and black hollowed out eye sockets. And as you know, I found it absolutely fucking terrifying. So that got me to thinking, why is it that we find this image of like these like pale humans with like sunken in, like blacked out eyes? Like, what makes that so scary? It's really, really common. And I found to me, for somebody who's not really a huge fan of horror, that's the kind of image that usually gets me to like shut the movie off or to kind of like, hell, I remember there was a Flash game on like Newgrounds. If any of you guys ever went on that, and it was like you were in like a train and it was like one of those point and click, like escape room kind of video games. Except at one point you had to open up this box, and then when you pull it down, suddenly there's just this like face with this like gaping open mouth with no eyes, and I actually almost pissed myself. So obviously that image is pretty present in my head. So I started researching it of what is it about this that's so terrifying, and what is it that seems to stick out almost more than almost any other monster in fiction. I mean, like, I go watch a movie about Princess Mononoke. There's a giant pig monster was covered in like tentacles and stuff like that. But that didn't keep me awake at night, and it seems like it should. There is a reason for it, and that reason is called Uncanny Valley. This shit went way deeper than I expected. I'm literally recording this. It's right now Tuesday at 6 p.m. Going a bit clutch daddy on this one because I took too long with the outline. There's so many back and forthing things, but it's just so interesting and it's so applicable to so many things that I enjoy. So I thought I would share it with you guys. So to get into it, like I said, I'm trying to, this is going to be kind of a mini episode. This isn't going to be one of the longer ones, I think. We'll see. But let's just jump right into it. First, let's just get into basics on what the words mean and where they come from. So the word uncanny is defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary as something that is seeming to have a supernatural character or origin, or being beyond what is normal or expected. According to psychology, however, that definition is more along the lines of the feeling of something being strangely familiar without being totally mysterious, or the feeling when something familiar happens in an eerie, taboo, or unsettling context. So the concept of uncanniness was first proposed by psychiatrist, Ernst Jensch, Jentsch. First proposed in his 1906 essay on the psychology of the uncanny. And this was further elaborated on by Sigmund Freud in his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche. Das Unheimliche. I'm so bad at this. But that is translated to uncanny. But of course, I had to try to Google translate it myself, and it came out as the scary. Ooh. Now, the idea of something uncanny was I've been trying to come up with examples to sort of really get what that feeling is like. Because Uncanny Valley has to deal with humans and humanoid looking things. But for something to be uncanny does not have to be human. Like, I'm trying to think, like, I don't know if this is a great example, but like if there was like, you know, you walk into your living room and say you have a kid and they're playing with their toys and it's like, cool, nothing weird. Let's change the scene a bit where it's pitch black at midnight. You walk out with the power out and lightning's flashing and your kid's just, playing like you would during the daytime. Technically, the action is the same, but the situation has made it creepy and uncomfortable. So even though it's familiar, it's like, or like deja vu, I think has sort of an uncanny feeling to it of like, I've been here before. This looks familiar, but it kind of is off-putting. So that's one thing I wanted to establish early on, that uncanny and something falling into Uncanny Valley are actually two completely separate ideas. And, yeah, I mean, they're related, but like, obviously they have the same name in it, but it's a little bit different. So psychologically, when something is uncanny, it does not necessarily have to be human in particular, but like, yeah, like I said, I'm already getting my big things this episode. I literally was like revising like the fifth time. And I finally just got so frustrated. I threw my empty can of Red Bull, said, fuck it. I'm just going to record it and see what happens. So this is the result is I'm already frustrating myself. So uncanny as a subject, psychology, cool. Moving forward. Curiously, the coining of the term Uncanny Valley was not at all the result of the psychological study stuff. It did come afterwards, but it wasn't necessarily directly inspired by uncanniness as an experience. Well, that's sort of, kind of, maybe. The phrase was first coined and first used in an obscure Japanese article from the year 1970. This article was entitled Bukimi no Tani Gensho, or Uncanny Valley Phenomenon, and it was authored by Masahiro Mori, a Japanese roboticist. I gotta point out, Mori, oh geez, like that correlation was just like, it wasn't even like a goosebumps. It was almost like an eye roll comparison. Anyways, Masahiro Mori was a Japanese roboticist, so one who studies robots. Human-robot interaction was a new concept in the late 60s and early 70s, and the whole idea for roboticists was integrating machines successfully into the workplace. Or maybe that's more of an engineering thing. I think roboticist is talking about more like closer to androids and stuff like that. So Mori, to kind of get the origin story of Uncanny Valley, Mori explained in an interview that when he would see like prosthetics, particularly like prosthetic hands or any sort of prosthetic body part, glass eyes and all that, it's pretty off-putting. He explained that if someone went to shake somebody's hand, but when they grabbed the hand, they found that it was fake, plastic, cold, static. Even though it looked human-ish, the result was a really frightened and unpleasant response. And I think it's important to add that he was one of those people who found that stuff pretty like unnerving and uncomfortable. He also said that as a kid, he thought that full-size wax figures of people were super creepy. And weirdly enough, the feeling of the prosthetics that he felt was actually a very similar unease that he had when he looked at the wax figures. So by merging those two together, he'd started to begin and developing Uncanny Valley. By definition, Uncanny Valley is an aesthetic zone where a humanoid object imperfectly resembles a human being. The results are feelings of discomfort or even revulsion. Obviously, robots didn't really catch on. I mean, most modern machinery doesn't look anything human. And part of me wonders if maybe there was a bit of that uncanny valley in action there, because to my knowledge, when people first started tinkering with the idea of automation and robotics, having machines do the work for us, I'm sure the picture in their head was, humanoid looking robots carrying boxes and putting things together for us. And, I'm sure that was like a big topic in like pulp magazines and stuff around the time. As Uncanny Valley proves, that would be really fucking weird and creepy. So whether they were inspired by that or not, engineers veered towards developing machines that are more away from the human form. Or it might not have impacted it at all, and engineers engineered things that were just more efficient. And it became, if you're an engineer, it's pretty dang obvious that the human form isn't efficient for everything. Anyways, here's just some quick examples of there are robots to this day that exist that fall into Uncanny Valley. I think one in particular, Five Nights at Freddy's animatronics. Although they're getting better at them, and I'll go into later about how you can use appeal as a way to sort of like circumnavigate the Uncanny Valley. A lot of the old animatronics, like I said, they're humanoid, but they're not quite there. They're humanoid and they're imperfectly personating a human, and that's weird and uncomfortable. We also have Sophia, the humanoid robot. That's that she has like a female face, but everything else about her is like robotic, so it just looks like a face slapped onto a machine that like talks to us, and supposedly it has like a personality and AI they're trying to develop. But like, and that I feel like I can even explain now. It looks like somebody ripped off a human face and put it on a machine, and that's pretty unsettling to look at. And also one last one, this is called the Telenoid. This one, I mean, it's a podcast. I mean, I can't show you the picture, but I would highly suggest looking it up. It's really creepy. Like that one, it's, as they say, it looks more like an alien, but there's just something so uncomfortable about it. So Uncanny Valley in action. Whoop-de-doo. Eventually, the scope of the Uncanny Valley expanded well beyond robots. The term itself was first translated from Japanese to English in the 1978 book Robots, Fact, Fiction, and Prediction by Josiah Reichardt. And the idea expanded until it spread and became pretty much common knowledge. I think a lot of people know about this. Naturally, though, it found its way into the psychological discussion of the uncanny. And like I said before, it's almost synonymous. So then the next question is, how is it measured and why do we call it a valley? Like I said before, audio medium. So I normally I could just show you a graph, but I mean, I would say right now, if you have the means, just Google it, Uncanny Valley, and you'll see the graph of what I'm trying to explain. This next section is going to be very technical and was extremely frustrating to try to get right. So bear with me. I'm going to do my best. Uncanny Valley, it's not like a test. Like, it's not like a litmus test of like, you could slap a piece of paper on something and it'll tell you how human it looks and how much you like it or not. It's very much a perception-based thing, but the best way to describe Uncanny Valley or where it occurs would be a typical XY graph. So, with this graph, and before we put any information on it, let's make some assumptions. When something isn't human at all, we can say it's 0% human, right? Easy. With that, we can assume that our affinity or the likability or sympathy of an object as a fellow human, which is a very important distinction for this chart, would also be at 0. So 0% human, our affinity for it or treating it as like an actual like 100% human would be at 0. Okay. Are you following me? Because sometimes I feel like I confuse myself and I'm like walking in a circle. The other way around should also work the same way. If something is perceived as 100% human, well, it should also be, gauged as 100 affinity points. Let's do a point score system. So let me try that again. When if we perceive something as 0% human, we're going to give it zero affinity points because we're like, it's not human. We're not going to treat it like a human. it's 100% human, we're going to give it 100 points because it's a human. You got to treat it like a human would. It doesn't matter if he's a mean or nice human, it's a human. And, you know, they want to eat, they want to hang out, they hate stubbing their toe. So, yeah, I'm going to try to shave off as many exceptions as possible because this is going to get hard. The idea when graphing to find Uncanny Valley is comparing that percentage of humanishness in comparison to the level of the affinity we have for it as a human. So basically those two things I described, the points and the percentage, we're just trying to compare those two. That's why we're making the graph. One side note, I'm going to do this really quick because honestly, this part of the outline just pisses me off. I've been looking at it for like hours today and I'm just so done with it. But what if we have a 0% human object like an apple or a tree that has like a naturally occurring face shape or something of the sort that would result in like a high affinity level? So it would be a 0% object with like 60 to 100 affinity points. Or the toast that had Jesus's face on it, you know, same thing. We know it's not human, it's a piece of toast, but our affinity level's really high. Or what about like a cat or a dog that, you know, we have super crazy high affinity for? So my first explanation for the cats and dog thing is, well, they're not human. So our affinity is for a cat or a dog is kind of a different zone. You know, we love them for the animals that they are, not because we think they're human. But you could also kind of argue that since it has a face and legs and emotions we recognize, technically they could make the list as like a really low percentage humanoid. You tell, honestly, I'll leave it up to you. Are cats and dogs human enough to make to the list? And you think that's great, go ahead, put them on the list. Sure. As for like the, you know, toast Jesus, we'll say it's a little human because it's got human-like features. Cats and dogs, yeah, I guess, but like, you know, with the Jesus thing, like I said, this is going to be a really confusing part. If you're not following me at all, it's okay. It'll be over soon and we can get to the cool stuff. So, for the sake of argument and for this pulsing headache I have right now, let's just assume there's no special exceptions. Rocks and trees, animals are 0% human, and humans are 100%. So, the hypothesis before we had Uncanny Valley is that humans will always perceive humanoid things with greater affinity. So, the more human they become, the more we should like it, right? Pretty simple. If this held true, then this chart that we're making, the XY graph, the data would just make a straight diagonal line going at a straight diagonal is actually pretty redundant, huh? An upward trending diagonal line. Nice, simple, swoosh, done. By the way, if you're curious about the specifics, x-axis would be percentage of perceived humanishness, and the y-axis would be the number of affinity points. Another thing that's kind of annoying to think of is we all have different ideas of what we find affable. So let's just pretend when we're making our graph that we're working with the general popular idea of how most people view humanoid things, and we'll input the data as such. So in actuality, and by actuality, I mean completely estimated, what do we have in our graph? Actually, something very funky. When we reach the 80 to 95% human looking range for a humanoid object, the affinity level drops. Actually, more like it fucking plummets down to the negatives. So if we're trying to picture this chart, it's a diagonal line going up, and then it's like a cliff and just goes right down. But just as soon as it hits rock bottom, it goes right back up, making one giant curve. And that curve in the chart is Uncanny Valley. Like I said before, and like in the definition, which honestly explained this well enough, I just wanted to make this more complicated by trying to describe a visual. But it is something humanoid that imperfectly resembles a human being. Close but no cigar. It's that sort of like the closer you get to the sun, the more your wings burn off. So I found it really interesting because this is a good example of the on paper versus reality kind of deal. Like there's a lot of things where it might sound good on paper, but when you actually execute it, it's like, oh wait, there's this big like chunk area where this whole hypothesis doesn't work at all. So yeah, we're done with science. Let's move on. I am actually extremely happy to be through that section. So let's go into some examples. Things that fall into Uncanny Valley include wax dolls, regular dolls, puppets, corpses, even, if we're considering them as objects, as they are now devoid of life. Attempts at humanoid robots, kind of like androids, 3D models, poorly rendered drawings, or even things with severe bodily mutilations, like zombies. And those creatures with the dark black or empty eye sockets I mentioned earlier. Fortunately, usually, hopefully, those don't occur in nature. Those are fiction. It's a design. It was created by somebody. But with that design, the reason why that's an example of Uncanny Valley is two possible reasons. One is it is reminiscent of a corpse. And the thing is our survival instinct does not like that. That's why when we look at dead things, it's like our initial, unless you're used to that kind of stuff, our initial reaction is, oh, fuck, because it reminds us of mortality. And one thing about, I think, just human survival is we can try to forget about it for a little bit, and that helps us focus on other things and blah, blah, blah. That's a whole other discussion. But another reason why the sunken eyes might be an Uncanny Valley thing is more in how we recognize eyes. As a fellow human, I hope, we are well aware that eyes tell us a lot. They can give out emotional state information, what somebody else is focusing on, the direction they are moving or will be moving. They say that that's a good way to avoid, when you do that like thing when you're walking on the road, you go left and then they go left and you go right and then they go right. I think they said if you follow their eyes, you can see where they're going. And I mean, if you're that quick, you can zip right by them. I don't know if that works at all, but I don't know. I read it somewhere. So when an eye, however, is an unblinking dark void, our instincts register that as either they're staring at nothing, staring at something, or staring right at you. And when it comes to staring, our monkey brain immediately goes to big red letters, predator. So when people or characters have those like hollow, dark, void husk eyes, it's scary to us because I guess in a way, our instincts are forcing us to perceive it as death incarnate, a thing that's dead that is up and moving, and also at the same time that's staring right at you, or as instincts might perceive it, hunting you, actively hunting you to death. So there was the explanation I was really looking for, and that was kind of half the inspiration of this episode. What about, though, I know not everybody finds it scary, though, which kind of is what makes Uncanny Valley more like pseudoscience-y. It's not something, you're going to be researching in like higher education or something like that, because for this exact reason, the things that I find scary is not necessarily the things that you find scary. When you see like a hollowed out like face or something like that, you might think pumpkins, or I don't know, because I'm scared of that kind of stuff. But that's like, horror is subjective and perception is subjective. When we're dealing with the Uncanny Valley, it changes from person to person. Like that shitty chart that we made earlier, realistically only apply, even with like a general sense, it doesn't really apply to everybody. And I think that's a great segue of why, well, you might have guessed that Uncanny Valley is amazing for the horror genre. It's a tool. You can use it to exploit that fear for people like me. And as for everybody else who's, it takes a little bit more, that's where you got to be a little bit more creative. So let's just dive into how Uncanny Valley is used by filmmakers, artists, designers to create some truly horrifying and unsettling experiences for their audience. Most genres of horror involve some form of distorted human. And that means, stretched body parts, discoloration, mutations, unusual movements, animal or monster type behavior that people don't normally do or are usually incapable of doing, extreme emaciation or starvation, or just straight up mutilation. So I imagine most people, when they see a human being bisected through the middle and you see all the gore and parts and blah blah. That's usually a pretty not a happy sight. Doesn't really put you in a great mood. Some people it does, which I assume is for various explanations. But hey, you do you. But in the general population, it's considered objectively very scary. I think a really good example in media, particularly video games, is Lisa, the ghost from PT, which was a teaser for a new Silent Hill game called Silent Hills that was canceled, which is honestly a tragedy. Also, now that I think about it, really anything from the Silent Hill universe can work in like Uncanny Valley, because if you think about it, a lot of the monsters or creatures have a human body or are made of human bodies or have some certain human body parts involved with it. So basically, they're just humans with something otherworldly fucked up about them. And why is that important? Because if the creatures weren't human looking, it wouldn't stick as much. That's half of what makes Silent Hill such a revered series, is how it just like lurches deep into the back crevices of your mind. And that's because of Uncanny Valley, because we're distorting the human form. And when we see like a tiger or like a bear or a beast coming after us, we already know to be afraid of it. It's kind of a given. Like it's in our DNA to be like, oh, fuck, sharp teeth, let's run. But the thing is we perceive other humans as safe. And I know that's not completely true because, there's murderers and shitheads all across the board. But like survival, if we're talking at purest survival instinct, humans are supposed to not kill each other and should be a zone of safety. Or it's like, if you're playing a video game with a bunch of monsters everywhere, when you see another human, you're put at ease, right? That's kind of that concept at work. It's scary. It's more psychological when we use humans. And that's, I think, why Uncanny Valley and horror just goes so hand in hand, is because it adds a layer of psychology to it, which sticks with us a lot more. I mean, I never saw, oh my God, what's that movie with the clap and then the lights go out and it's like the haunting thing, and there's like the girl in the bed and she's like pointing at. See, this is why if Nick was here, like he could answer the question for me. And I'm sure you're answering the question for me right now, but I can't hear you because I recorded this in the past. So, yeah. Human things in a horror situation are objectively scarier because they come close to home. Anyways, back to Silent Hill. If we're talking about Lisa in PT, she is a ghastly smiling woman who is half decomposed, covered in blood and pus. Those fucking hollowed eyes I hate so much. And I know I said it before, but I want to reiterate, the smile I think is what really like makes this thing fucked up, because like I kind of touched at before, humans are supposed to be a zone of comfort, and a smile is supposed to be something welcoming and cheerful and something to make you feel better. When the thing that is actively trying to fucking kill you has a huge old smile on it, it's disturbing as hell. Now we're getting more into the psychological concept of uncanny, of it's something familiar, but in the context it's in, it turns this familiar, welcoming thing into something creepy and terrible. And it's almost like bastardizing something good into something bad is even more scary and terrifying than something that was just bad and scary to begin with. So I don't know. We can really go into depth with that kind of stuff, but in short, that's kind of how I feel about it, and that's kind of why I think, like, why that kind of stuff for me personally. Like I said, that's the kind of stuff that scares me the most when it comes to like fiction, like especially with the more like it doesn't even have to be fully realistic. It just needs to get the idea across well enough. Like I love Nightmare on Elm Street, but that's because I can see the strings, for example. Actually, great segue again. Let's talk about movies. Some of the movies that I just straight up refuse to see are possession movies. And I think also too, maybe, and now that I'm thinking aloud to myself, I think maybe I just have a real sensitivity to the Uncanny Valley thing. Maybe that's why I have such a hard time with just these very specific types of like horror. But with possession, I'd like to use the example of Cheryl from the 1981 Evil Dead and Reagan from The Exorcist. There's just something more personal and impactful about a possessed human body. See, like before with like Lisa and stuff, that creature was an entity of itself. But when it comes to demonic possession, it is again a bastardization of the human form. And in that, like, they're like floating and doing like inhuman stuff, which is Uncanny Valley. It's human, but there's something wrong. They're not quite there yet, or they're doing something that the normalcy is broken. Because actually, in a way, this is sort of an interesting veer off, because it's not that they don't look human, it's they look human, but they're not acting like it. So that's, I think, okay, so if Uncanny Valley, obviously it has a start point and an ending point. I think possessed people is more on like the ending point of the Uncanny Valley of like, it's on that upward swing, but it's also covered in scars and it's, throwing up pea soup and shit. But seeing one of our own or another human acting so inhuman makes us dread it. And in this case, especially in possession, it's not just the whole like, oh no, like it's a predator now, or this thing that I was supposed to feel safe with is now attacking me. But with possession, I think it's kind of a unique case in that you could be next. You don't want to lose control of yourself and turn into that too. And now there's like an additional level of fear. And it's disturbing and creepy. And because it's bad enough to feel like something is basically wearing our skin and trying to kill us. Like, that makes it almost worse than something that just is an outright monster, kind of like I was saying before. And going forward a little bit with the acting abnormal, if you ever saw The Grudge, there's that really fucked up like backwards walk thing, which is like, on paper, that doesn't sound that bad, but when you see it and you just see a human body moving in a way it's not supposed to, survival instinct kicks in, because one, we're probably thinking like, oh fuck, that looks really painful, because we have an inner sense of empathy. But like, oh fuck, that looks really painful, and it's also coming for me. So this is really turning into like a psychology of horror episode. But I don't know. I just hope you find it as interesting as I find it, because like I said, I hate horror. I find it fascinating, but goddamn, it keeps me up and it screws my psychology in so many not pleasant ways. But we can say that this is sort of an impact of Uncanny Valley. It's a result of it, of something humanoid but imperfectly human. And that's okay. I think I just answered kind of my own question about it. Is it's imperfectly human. So when something is human formed and it acts like a beast, it's imperfect. And that's weird. And we don't like that. So someone might also ask, does Uncanny Valley apply if, say, we have a human psychopath trying to kill us? We'll say Psycho, Norman Bates. Is that Uncanny Valley? Because, it's scary. We don't feel a lot of empathy for that. Technically, I would say no, because we do perceive, because it's up with Uncanny Valley, it's more about perception, how much we perceive it as human. And if something we perceive as human is not, playing the part, that's Uncanny Valley. A guy trying to kill you is, we're not scared of them because they're imperfectly human. We're scared of them because they have a knife and they're coming for us. It's a different kind of zone. And it got me thinking too about there's so serial killer Ted Bundy, when he was on trial, he was all like smiles because he's known for being like, a handsome guy at the time. And, he was just very calm and chill up until the jury gave the guilty verdict, in which he stood up and screamed really violently at them that they were wrong and stuff. And you can actually see that photo online, and it could be perceived like, oh, see, he's more, that could be Uncanny Valley. Like, you see that face, that's the face of a monster. No, it's not Uncanny Valley, because we still, like I said, we still know he's a human. It's still scary, and it's still like ranks similar to that, but I think it's not Uncanny Valley. This is different. Uncanny Valley is more about, it's an aesthetic thing. It's about how things look. And that's really as far as it goes. Like, if we can go into how we view people socially, how we view people emotionally, attractiveness and healthiness and strength. But like, Uncanny Valley is purely aesthetic. I really should have said that a lot earlier, huh? But hey, you know, we're going through this journey together. I'm learning just as much as I'm going. Sometimes it's good to just jump right in, and I'm learning that lesson today. So, on a more lighthearted note, let's talk about Uncanny Valley being used as a tool to make media less scary. That's right, you can use it reversely. And that is actually a method highly utilized in, yes, you guessed it, animation. One of my favorite things, because that is how I pay the bills. But if you look at early animation, both 2D and 3D, you might notice that characters come off as strange or even scary to look at. So I don't know how many of you have seen, like, you know, those old like black and white cartoons, or, you know, before Looney Tunes. I'm talking early stuff. It's a little odd. It's kind of off and it's strange. And same with like early 3D stuff. Like, trying to think of a good example of it, because, you know, we've come so far. It's like, you know, a lot of the really shitty ones don't really, but you've seen shitty 3D before. It's weird. It's uncomfortable. And a lot of the reason, especially why 2D and 3D animation in its early stages looks so weird, and I'm going to emphasize a little bit more on the 2D, that's because the idea of appeal wasn't fully understood yet. And appeal, as I'll get into a little bit more, is finding that zone between making something look human enough to empathize with, but be exaggerated enough to, like, you know, not be in the Uncanny Valley. We don't want it to look too human, because have you seen those like drawings where it's like they're really overly detailed for like a cartoon and it's just kind of weird? That's because it's an Uncanny Valley. It's not quite there. It's imperfect, and the only way to reach that, well, I'll get to that in a second. So let's talk about Disney. They are basically the first major studio in America. I don't know how global this thing, maybe somebody discovered it earlier. I don't know. I didn't look too much into it. But we'll say Disney was the first major studio, at least in America, to really understand and exploit appeal. Ub Iwerks is the artist who created Mickey Mouse's classic design. And think of it like this. Without the idea of the Mickey that we know in your mind, just imagine somebody coming down and being like, okay, here's my idea for a character. It's a mouse, but it's humanoid. Now, as a concept on its own, that sounds terrifying. That sounds horrible. Who would want to see a mouse that's standing on its own 2 feet and, you know, is like 5'8"? And here's where the magic happens. Pardon the joke about, because it's Disney. Ub Iwerks' design choices are what made Mickey Mouse work. He used a specific type of shapes. He sized them specifically, the type of colors, the type of lines, how it moved when he animated it, and all that sort of coming together became the ingredients to what became known as appeal. And another thing too is, we're getting more into, like, you know, character design, like specifics, but we as people, we're symbolic thinkers. You know, when we think of things, because I venture to guess most of us out here did not put their student tuition into studying the arts, and yet we can recognize artistic graphic symbols pretty universally. I mean, that's why we have stop signs. That's why we think symbolically, because it's quick and it's efficient. I feel like that was one of the reasons cavemen were especially able to get ahead of everything, because they could make marks and symbols for, oh, don't hunt here. Oh, the water's poisoned. Oh, this symbols. And this symbol, think about this. It's to show you, if you're a non-artist, which is totally cool, when you draw a tree, what do? 2 lines and some fluffy stuff on top. That's because you're thinking symbolically. And it's efficient. It's one of the reasons why we evolved so well. We had a good system. When it comes to making a character, that doesn't fall into Uncanny Valley. We need to sort of we can utilize symbolic thinking. We could trick people into, giving symbols that say it's a symbol of a mouse, but it's not a anatomical mouse. And by utilizing that, that's how people can come up with a design like Mickey Mouse, where we see it as a humanoid mouse, but it's not terrifying. And also is crazy, instantly recognizable. The whole iconography that we can, that is an art school type episode subject, which I highly doubt that Nick will let me ever do, or it'll never air and see the light of day, but we'll see. So there's the idea. This is how we can create a character that, normally would be terrifying and make it likable, and likable enough to even empathize, sympathize, want to watch it, even be entertained by it. And similarly, we can look to a character like Popeye, who is a human, but not really, because we're drawing him more symbolically. Like, yes, the anatomy is still there, but I mean, he's not being drawn anatomically correct. One, that'd be ridiculously hard to animate. And two, that'd be really, I mean, for example, to expand on that, if you've ever seen anything rotoscoped, which rotoscoping is when we take video footage of something and we draw over the frames of the video. Oddly enough, it looks really stiff. And actually, I would even venture to say that's a really good example of Uncanny Valley of we're trying to draw this thing, and yes, it moves just like the video because we drew it right on top of the video. So by all means, it should look more human, but it doesn't. It looks stiff. It looks weird. It looks mechanical. It's not perfect. It doesn't look great. So that's another reason why this sort of dialing it back, exaggerating things, making it actually look less human is what makes us treat them more human. Really ironic, but it works. And Disney knew that, and they pushed that shit to the extreme. And I mean, yeah, I mean, you could take a look at like a character like Snow White. I mean, obviously, still a fairly popular character, but compared to the popularity of something like, Ariel from Little Mermaid or Elsa from Frozen, much bigger eyes, unrealistic proportions, all that stuff. That's all consciously done to make us want to. It's ironic, really, because they look actually horribly inhuman. But by utilizing the symbolic idea, we can pull away from the Uncanny Valley into an area actually pretty far away from it and still be able to empathize it even more. We're being a little too positive right now, so let's bring it down a bit. An example of something in the 2D realm, though, that would 100% fall into Uncanny Valley is like, have you ever seen like a really bad tattoo that somebody got of like their girlfriend or something like it was a tattoo that was trying to be photorealistic and they just fucked it up royally? That is 100% Uncanny Valley. It's like we can tell it's a human, but since it's so poorly rendered, it's disturbing and uncomfortable to look at. Versus like if it was drawn beautifully or properly. And kind of like I was talking about earlier with these like animations that look sort of like almost human, the only fix would be to like draw each frame like photorealistically. Like that's insane. Like who has the time to do that? Actually, somebody did. There's a movie that I think it was like a Da Vinci. No, fuck Van Gogh. Holy crap. I'm going to lose my degree. It was that Van Gogh movie. And even then there was some liberties taken with the anatomy. But basically the idea was every frame of this animated film was an oil painting. And they had to commission a bunch of like traditional oil painted. And yeah, that shit is whack. So yes, you could do it. It's just a colossal use of time and money. So if we're going back to the tattoo, it's going to be in that danger zone of it's human enough that we register it as human, but it's imperfectly done. So we put it in the danger zone, even though it's not going to get us. There's just, it hits that instinctual part of our brain of like, not liking that. And there actually is a reason why our instincts kind of go off on that kind of stuff. We're going to get to that in a little bit. So we're almost there. And then we could talk about why Uncanny Valley? Like, what is it about us internally that makes Uncanny Valley even happen? But before we do that, I wanted to stumble into the 3D world for a little bit, more of the digital 3D world, which is extremely popular nowadays. But here, Uncanny Valley is extremely important. It's a very big factor when it comes to creating models or assets for realistic 3D art. Because as you all know, modern games and movies use a lot of realistic 3D art. And I mean, yeah, there's like stylistic stuff like, Pixar or Enter the Spider-Verse or Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, yeah. So in that case, like with 2D animation, it's pulling away from the Uncanny Valley to kind of give the, we're working with symbolic thinking. But so what about these things that really do go for realistic? Because like I said, it's pretty dang common. And there's some that we like more than others. Now, why is that? I got to say, I'm not super well versed in 3D. It's not really my cup of tea. It's not really where I work or really something I understand a whole lot in terms of the creation of them. But I imagine that when creating 3D characters or assets, the goal is actually not realism. The goal is not to make it look like a real human. Goal is actually a thing called naturalism. And it's in the name. It moves naturally. It looks natural. It looks and feels like it's moving the way it should. But the difference though between naturalism and realism is that when something is naturalistic, it's not perfectly anatomic. It's not 100% anatomically correct. It's not how you would see a person or that thing in reality. There's liberties taken. Actually, a lot of liberties and exaggerations. The thing is, though, you really do need a trained eye to sort of piece it together. And that's the beauty of it is if you have an untrained eye, like, for example, when you see Call of Duty, you see it as a person doing human things. But it's pulled away from the Uncanny Valley where it doesn't look too human. And that's why we can sort of differentiate between video games and a real life person extremely easily. Because even though they look real, even though they are quote unquote realistic graphics, it doesn't fall into Uncanny Valley because they are specifically exaggerating it to A, make the rigging and animation easier for them, and B, it's easier to look at. But that doesn't mean everybody does that well. There are, I'm sure, as you've seen, plenty of attempts at hyper realistic graphics where they go for making it look more real than natural. And that shit tends to just fall on its face. For some of the more like popular examples from a while ago, Mass Effect Andromeda, which bragged about having like the most advanced like facial like reconstruction, digital, blah, 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 which ended up being a complete disaster because they looked really disturbing. Injustice 2, that fighting game, I think kind of had a similar engine. The Beowulf movie, the CG one, if any of you have seen that, just kind of odd to look at. It's just, it toes that line. It registers, but it's not exaggerated enough. And like we've been stating a lot, when it's too close, we actually don't sympathize with it. So if they would have dialed it back and made it more cartoony, we would have sympathized with it tenfold. And also I've heard from some people the Polar Express. I haven't really I've seen like clips of it, and totally. Polar Express is totally Uncanny Valley. It's too close, and it's not as expressive enough. They're like, they just look so dead. And also, the Cats movie, I hear that one's there's the reason we find those disturbing is it's Uncanny Valley. It's too close. It's a thing that's humanoid and moving like a human, but with the body of a cat. Like, it's kind of like we were talking about with the humanoid Mickey Mouse thing. If we get rid of all that exaggeration and stuff, that's what we get. Or Cats, the movie. And additionally to that, there's the Lion King remake, when they remade it with all like the real lions. Pretty badly received. And a lot of it is just because and this is actually a great example of Uncanny Valley working for things that aren't human. Because we know what a tiger looks like, relatively. Or lion. Jesus. that was quite the blunder. But even then, it's like something that we understand should act and move a certain way. And then when they do it imperfectly, it's weird. It's not as disturbing as like a human per se, but it's enough to be off-putting and strange. And I think they made them like, their mouths move and stuff like that, like people do. And so then now we're getting into the human uncanny valley, and it's strange. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't make us want to root for them. It makes us want to, leave. So in summary, to sort of explain really this, I guess in one like, nicely wrapped box, is that when with Uncanny Valley and in hyperrealism in 3D, it almost doesn't make sense why it doesn't work, and because all the anatomy's there, like it's moving and maybe it's not super perfect, but why are we like so bothered by it? And I think that's because when something is at that hyperrealism, it's pretty damn close to the real deal. But the thing is that also means our standard of how it acts changes. When we see a cartoon, we expect it to act like a cartoon. The regular rules don't apply. When we see Call of Duty, it's a video game. When a bomb goes off, you fly away. It's human, yes, but like not 100%. But when something is hyper real, we start to subconsciously hold it to the same standard as a live human. And the reason why it's so unnerving is because it's impossible to put it to the standard of a fully nuanced live human being. And we pick up on that pretty dang quick, because if you're going to animate something ultra heavy, like ultra real, and it's not reacting 100, because how are you supposed to know exactly what to put every body part at all times as a fully nuanced human? Like it's something they're still working on, I think, to this day. They haven't perfected it yet, but it is a pretty goddamn hard thing to do, because more often than not, you miss something and just immediately our system, because it tricks us into thinking it's a real human, and our system doesn't like being tricked. It makes us feel like it's a predator. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a monster in human clothes. That's kind of like the viewpoint I think it creates internally, at least. So they're still working on it. We'll see. I know too, they have those like hyper real sex toys. Let me actually look that up real quick. Let's see what we're dealing with here. I've heard there was like, for a while ago, I remember they were saying like, oh, they like really shot up in quality. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. So hyper realistic sex doll. Let's see. I don't know. See, I think, good God. See, I think my big problem with these things is I feel like it's just looks too like, yeah, they got like the body and stuff right, but the face, like, it just looks like a corpse. Like, God, these things are going for like $4,000. And I think that kind of goes back to the whole, like, that explanation of like, when it kind of looks like when it looks like a corpse, our body doesn't like it. It gets upset. It reminds us of our own mortality. And I think that's the point I'm trying to get at, is it's like it's towing the line of like necrophilia, because it's like it's basically a dead human in makeup, except it's not a dead human. It's made of silicone. And see, to me, that's weird. Like, okay, there's a couple that are like closer, but like, see, what they do, I think, is they really go hard on the lighting on the advertising figures. So they look more human because, they put stuff on it and, stand it up, put it in poses and all that stuff. But remember, this thing it's stiff. This thing is going to it's an object when you get it. And I think it's some clever marketing on their part. But so to answer your question, no, I think it's weird. I wouldn't do it. They talk a good game, but no. Save your money. So Uncanny Valley can be useful. I should definitely point out again that it's not a rule that is backed by science. It's imperfect and sometimes completely wrong. That's because people are made uncomfortable by different things and at different levels that can completely depend on your culture, your upbringing, your location, or your experiences. Like, I mean, just simple example, I'm terrified of horror and horror films, and Nick probably jerks off to it. The data is it's too skewed. We can't really, we can't call it science because perception and subjectivity. It's just it varies too much. And like another way to look at this is horror films from like the 60s, they're not scary anymore. Like, what we found scary a couple generations ago isn't really that scary anymore. It's like the upbringing changes things. So the whole Uncanny Valley thing, I mean, I guess it doesn't really change a whole lot, but I don't know. That is kind of interesting to think about okay, no, actually it kind of does work. So we have Nosferatu, for example, creepy and kind of something of like that Uncanny Valley thing of like it looks human, but it's like floating. It's got the teeth and all that creepy stuff. Okay, Uncanny Valley. But if we look at that now, it's unsettling, but it's not as scary as we'll say the necromorphs from Dead Space. I guess that's kind of a bad example. Those things are more beastly with like, human faces and stuff like that. But like they're scarier things than Nosferatu now. And like, although it is creepy, it just, it might have gone down a peg. So it's like the Uncanny Valley range, it changes. And when something changes like that, it's not a reliable source. It's not rule. It's a theory. It's a guideline. And that's just something I just kind of, once again, wanted to reiterate. So let's hop on towards the last section. And finally, like I said previously, let's go over why Uncanny Valley happens. Why do we have that reaction? We've talked about kind of like the corpse idea, but there are actually several explanations about why we feel the way we feel with it. And nobody really reached anything fully conclusive on it yet. Because like I said, it's subjective. So logic doesn't really 100% follow, I guess, per se. It's just, like I said, it varies too much to really have some science. So anyways, let's get into it. One idea is that mankind has a sort of mate selection sense, and it's supposed to activate when we see another human that we are sexually attracted to or within what we find sexually attractive. So in other words, monkey brain, I see human, I decide if I want the fuck. Simple. Seeing something almost human is just human enough to activate our mating sense, which, long story short, you're going to look at it and be like, can I fuck it? And when it looks off, we are just immediately like, our instincts go red, they go crazy. They're like, oh, what the fuck? No. So supposedly that could be like, because internally or biologically, when something isn't quite almost human, and this is where things kind of hit like a sketchy territory of, say, if we have somebody who has like a flesh-eating disease or something like that, or they're just like covered in like boils or something crazy like that, is that technically an example of Uncanny Valley? And it's a matter of perception, because like we said, Uncanny Valley could have something to do with like, emaciation and all that stuff, but there's that relationship to does it look like I can have offspring with this? And that's part of what we find sexually attractive, or at least the basis of what we currently find sexually attractive in other humans is health and fertility. And when something doesn't look quite all the way, or they are human but have something that looks or feels that, we'll say, for lack of a better term, and all due respect of people going through it, defective. That's why we have this sort of like, that's where the Uncanny Valley reaction comes from, is it's just really relatable to that. It's that, but projected onto the artificial. So that's one explanation of, in short, Uncanny Valley exists because if it looks human, but it doesn't look fuckable, fuck it. But not really. Jeez. Another explanation is simply, like I've said before, the fear of death. We've covered with the hollow eyes, seeing our form distorted just reminds us of our mortality. And Uncanny Valley is a vague reminder of our mortality. It's such a buried subconscious thing. Like when we see that weird android, we're not like, oh fuck, that makes me think of dying. It's supposedly something a lot more subconscious. And that's why Uncanny Valley is such a mysterious, odd feeling, is because we can't really put our finger on it, but it could be just, that internal idea of it's death, and that's our instincts sending us messages of like, get away from it, like, or like that, that predatory thing of like when things they look not quite human, it could be something in disguise trying to kill us or something like that. The last possible explanation I have today, there's a lot more, but this has gone on long enough. Last possible explanation I have today is that when something is in Uncanny Valley, it violates our sense of normal, and that's what causes that's where that unease comes from. So just like with ultra realistic 3D graphics, when we perceive something as human, we hold it to a human standard, and we expect it to have a fully human behavior, like, with all the nuances. Even weird people, they're still act more human than something rigged and animated to attempt to look human, because that's just we naturally are. And seeing our natural human behavior bastardized will bring our guards up like crazy. Like, it doesn't drive us to madness, but like, it gets you tense because I think the reason is because suddenly something predictable became unpredictable, and unpredictability in nature is extremely dangerous. So I want to reiterate that point, because I think that's really important here with Uncanny Valley is humans are, not always predictable, but are relatively predictable. And that alone already. So there's already a layer of unpredictability with humans. Now you take a human that doesn't act like a human at all. That's now 2 layers of unpredictability. We're probably freaking the fuck out right now. And that's a possible reason why Uncanny Valley exists. That's that feeling of just this, like, this shit's getting so unpredictable that I want to get away. I want to look away. I don't like it. Like I said, we could go into a lot more stuff, but at this point, it's just it's behavioral studies. That's more like a thesis kind of stuff. So instead of, being built for a sci-fi podcast, but ultimately, I think that will do it for today or this week. This has been Uncanny Valley. I know this barely had anything to do with aliens or cryptids, but if Nick can do a show about whatever he wants, I can do a show about whatever I want. And also, I mean, it could kind of apply. Like, I know in a previous episode, there was that creature, I forget its name, where it copies you perfectly, but the only catch is that it can't talk. Like, that's technically an Uncanny Valley thing of utilizing Uncanny Valley to, sniff out imposters. I don't want to make another Among Us joke, but like, kind of like that. You could think Uncanny Valley. And so it might be easy. I don't know. But hopefully you guys had a good time. Yeah, like I said, new regular episode next week with Nick and me. But I was really glad to do the research on this and talk about it with all you today. I know I both learned something and got the biggest headache of my life, but that's just a lesson for me in the future of don't over-research, just go for it. But like I said, hopefully I was able to find some interesting stuff and had some takes that, might be cool or interesting. I don't know. At the very least, I hope I made your drive or walk or whatever you're doing less boring. So thank you for being here, sticking it through. It's been a fun hour or so. Count Chocula episode's still in the works. I mean, technically, just as a design point, the design isn't in Uncanny Valley because remember, it's a cartoon. Definitely on purpose because, like Disney, like anything that uses a Disney tactic has to be kind of evil. So I think that correlation is pretty clear if you ask me. But that aside, if you're listening on iTunes, if you could hit us with a 5-star rate and review, please check out all of our other episodes. Like I said, this is a special exception of this episode is just me. You could, if you're on Spotify, you could click that follow button. We get new episodes every single Wednesday. Instagram is @CEOTPK. Our YouTube is Close Encounters of the Podcast Kind. Twitter is @CEOTPK1. Facebook, you can check us out, Close Encounters of the Podcast Kind, or facebook.com/CEOTPK. You can email us at ceotpk1@gmail.com. Our Discord is discord.gg/lowercase b, number 6, capital C, capital T, number 5, capital M, capital X. If you feel the need to donate, ko/fi.com/CEOTPK. That is our coffee website. Do not feel the need. It is non-essential. It's just there as a tip jar if you feel like you wanna. But yeah, I guess that pretty much covers it. Like I said, we have a ton of episodes, a lot more good content coming your way, and I will see you all next week. Later. It's actually, if it wasn't,